What's up, guys? Welcome to Ferret Face Fell Productions. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a revisit to the GPX Moto FSE 300R. Now, I have been riding the absolute crap out of these bikes for the last several weeks and months, I guess, at this point in time, and I keep waiting for the cheap Chinese gremlins or something to come out of the woodwork and tell me that these are terrible bikes. Each of our GPX Moto bikes have several hours and a few hundred miles of trail riding at this point. We've yet to have any issues, and we've even been renting a few of them. I get asked all the time when I'm out riding on these bikes, are these cheap Chinese clones that are breaking and falling apart like some of the other Chinese brands out there like Apollo? I think a lot of people just really want these Chinese bikes to fail or be terrible or die on some sort of sword that their KTM was worth the $12,000. Now, these aren't a KTM or a $12,000 or $13,000 bike. They're just not. But the quality is there, and they compare quite well to a lot of the Japanese dual sports, and in many ways they are much better. So now that I've had a feel for both the 250 and the 300R, I think I can talk quite a bit to the 300R's strengths compared to the 250 and a little bit of the 450. I haven't ridden the 450 a whole lot yet. Now, first, I would like to reiterate that these bikes are imported by a U.S. company in Utah. They offer parts locally. They're very easy to get a hold of most of the time. Just give them a call, get parts. You can order one of these bikes straight to your door. The FSE 300R comes in right around $6,000, depends on where you're having it shipped to. And the 300R is a 6-speed, 300cc dual overhead cam fuel-injected motor. So first, I'm going to go over some of my favorite strengths and pros to this bike, and then we'll get to some of the downsides and things that I don't like about the GPX Moto bikes as well as the 300R specifically. Of course, one of my favorite things is that the GPX Moto bikes come with an MSO that states that they are a motorcycle. So in the majority of states, you can turn them into a street-legal dual sport. That's key to me. I have to have a plated bike here in Colorado, connecting trails, doing dual sport stuff in between small towns and things like that is really key for a lot of the riding around here. And that's a huge strength to me, especially some bikes coming in as off-road only vehicles. Another strength is the 300's motor, where some of the other 300s in this price range, like the Honda 300L or the KLX 300, have a little bit more of a mild power range. The GPX Moto's engine seems to have a lot more mid-range and top end. It's more fun and more lively. I wouldn't say it's necessarily more horsepower, but the riding of it seems to be more interesting and intriguing than riding those other bikes for me. Another cool feature is that there is fuel injection tuners for these bikes that you can advance the timing with, get a little bit more power and bottom end response. So we have a few guys out there that are making some great maps for these bikes, and that offers some great options to be able to add more power and more capabilities to this bike as you go on. The stock mapping of this engine is quite good. It idles very well. It's got the usual fuel injection weirdness with high idle when you first start it and it's cold. Beyond that, I think the characteristics are pretty good. The motor is not the best off of idle and at very low RPMs. There's kind of a surgy pulley feeling, but once you get into the mid-range, it feels fantastic. The bike is really kind of torquey, especially at the bottom of the mid-range. It really pushes you to ride this bike a little bit faster, and that made it a lot more fun and a great experience for me. The Szc Suspension. I get asked all the time if this Chinese-made suspension is any good. And what's funny is almost always I tell people that it's far better than the Japanese counterparts. The forks are an open cartridge design, which seems to be pretty good. They're adjustable with clickers on the top as well as the bottom for rebound and compression. For me, who's riding single track and harder, rockier stuff a lot of times, I like it to be a pretty soft experience. So of course I tone down compression and rebound a fair bit, and I really set them up in a way that I like it almost as much as my beta suspension. And this has got to be my favorite feature over a lot of the Japanese dual sports out there that don't have adjustable suspensions or limited ability to adjust them. The GPX Motos come with springs that are weighted for somebody who's right around, I would say 190 to 200 pounds. So that makes a lot of sense here in the United States for most of your average riders. And on top of that, the adjustments on the top and bottom really allow you to dial it in within reason. With everything, there is some limits, and I'll go ahead and say that if you're a hard, faster rider, you're probably going to find the limits of the suspension pretty quickly. That being said, there are options to upgrade the suspension further. People out there on Facebook like Joe Henner has some great tutorials, and he builds race bikes, so he's got the little 250E tricked out with all new suspension components and has good advice for upgrading them. The rear shock is very compliant. I got it set up once again a little bit on the softer side for myself, which I love. It's very easy to dial it in. I think some of the issues that I have with the rear have to do with the piston setup. I'm not a huge fan of the piston reservoirs. I like to go to the bladders. I think it's a little bit more consistent and smoother ride style. Although, if you're a faster, harder rider, the rear shock actually might be a little bit better, if not slightly harsh. Nonetheless, my stock DRZ suspension had absolutely nothing on this, and even with the race tech and new springs and stuff, I would say that made it about equivalent to the suspension. The accessories that come with the GPX is another good strong point. It comes with a pretty decent skid plate that actually has linkage protection. Now, it's not a very thick skid plate, but it is very usable and it seems to protect quite well. I've smashed the bottom pretty bad at this point. The handlebars are really good quality. I haven't had any issues with those. I feel like they're better quality than what comes on a lot of your other dual sports. Of course, the headlight and all the turn signals, things like that, all work, and they're pretty good quality. The headlight itself is very usable on the street, has a high and low function, has a horn as well that comes with. So the accessories that come with the bikes are pretty top notch. I've got no complaints with that. Another strength is the weight of the 300R. The 300R weighs in right at 288 pounds with the full 2.5, I think, gallons of fuel, oil, and with the headlight on it, of course. Pretty much for any 300cc bike that's in this category and price range, for it to weigh under 300 pounds is actually very good. I also get asked all the time how the plastics, because the plastics, of course, look like KTM ripoffs, and a lot of times ripoffs can be cheap and break, so on and so forth. The plastics on this bike, I'm happy to say, are very flexible. I have not had anything crack or break, even dropping them on rocks. So that's a really good win for me. Even the decals are a thick, good quality, haven't had any issues. I'd say overall build quality, much like the 250E, is very good. The welds look good. The coatings on all the frame parts and pieces feel really nice. Initially, the build quality of these bikes is very good. We haven't had any issues thus far. The only thing that I'll caution, much like something like my DRZ 400, is some of the metals on the bike are a little on the softer side, so you don't want to go cranking down on stuff too hard. But I found that's no different than on a lot of the other bikes that I've owned. Now time for some cons. So as with any bike, there are some downsides. And the first one that I found that was just kind of my biggest annoyance when we first got these was the speedo cables. So two of our bikes that we got, they came with defective speedo cables. They were pretty much broken and non-functional from the get-go. The good news is that GPX Moto replaced them right away with an updated design. So far, that has not had any problems. The gauge of the wire was a little bit better, and the design was just overall a much better thought, so I'm glad that they're supporting the bikes. Another thing I don't like is some of the electronics and how they store them underneath the seat doesn't really have anywhere to go, and I found myself trying to use some like 3M double sticky tape to hold one of the fuse holders down. So things like that, I wish they kind of had a better place and organization for that stuff. So that's a very minor thing, of course, but an annoyance nonetheless. Something else that I would like to see as these bikes kind of progress in the United States is some service manuals and other things that have been properly translated and built in English. So there are service manuals that exist for these NC 300 motors. Of course, they're primarily in Chinese. You get the gist, and if you ever worked on bikes, it's not a big deal, but there needs to be a lot more material that's for newer riders. These really kind of cater to new riders, and we need to help them out with some better stuff on how to set them up, as well as how to maintain them properly with good directions. I'll finish out with some of my preferences and thoughts on the 300. At the end of the day, it's a great bike, and it's a lot of fun to ride, even in single track, or if you're riding a little bit faster stuff and rocky stuff. It doesn't really matter. The bike can be really adapted to anything that you ride. But for me personally, the 300 is not my favorite in their lineup. And the reason is all personal preference. I tend to like bikes that are have a little bit more character, and they're a little bit more interesting to ride. Maybe they're harder to ride even. The 300 in some ways makes it very easy to ride even difficult terrain. Very easy to slip the clutch. It's very easy to get power in there and pick the wheel up over things. The bike isn't too terribly heavy. So there's a lot of things going for it. But the 250E offers some things that are kind of quirky, like tuning its carburetor was a little bit fun for me and frustrating at the same time, but it's also a unique engine because it's a little air-cooled, peppy motor that's got lots of torque, and riding it in harder conditions, I've got to concentrate a little bit more on how I plan the throttle or hop over things, and that's really fun for me. Whereas the 300 kind of makes it a little bit easier experience, I think, in some ways. I don't want to use the word numb or maybe that it's not fun. It's just the 300 is just putzing along with good torque, good power. You give it a little bit of gas, it just goes. It's just a very good, reliable bike in its class. And if I'm being honest, the 300 is definitely going to be the better pick to go on the road. It's got more power, and if you gear it down a little bit, or up I suppose, for the road, then you're going to find that it's 6 gear, it's very compliant on the road, it tends to have a little bit more passing power. The top end of the motor makes it not as buzzy, it's a lot more kind of a balanced engine, so that's another huge plus for it too. Nowadays I don't spend much time on the roads, so not really a concern for me. GPX Moto has done a fantastic job bringing these bikes to the market and making sure that they're something that customers will enjoy, that's reliable and fun. And I've got nothing against that. They are at $6,000. We don't really have a whole lot of other choices right now. And picking a GPX isn't a bad choice. They're lots of fun. There are hundreds if not thousands of people that own these bikes and they love them, and we work together to solve some problems or other issues and talk about tuning and stuff like that on Facebook. Those are some of my favorite things about this bike. They're really kind of an enthusiast bike. It has filled a dead space where for so long it's pick the Japanese bike or spend $12,000. But they're also proven, and a lot of people have put hundreds of hours and thousands of hours on these bikes as well as raced them, and they've had really good results. At the end of the day, you have to buy the bike that works for you the best. Some of us prefer 2-strokes, some of us prefer 4-strokes. There's no good answer for what bike is going to be best for you. What I can tell you is that GPX Moto is a good quality bike. And if you're in the Colorado or Colorado Springs area, A&M Moto Toys, the company that I founded with Meeker Extreme, we rent these bikes out. You can try out our entire lineup or rent one for a few days, go up to the mountains and test it out to your heart's content. I challenge people to test these out because sometimes you just don't know until you ride one. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll catch you on the next one. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Ferret Face out.